Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. The lady from our first story is a hypocrite. Those spots are not meant for parents with kids that can walk either. They're meant for pregnant women / people with babies and strollers. She's a lazy person and was mad she had to walk 10 seconds more. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned on bell so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. She told me she's sick of people like me being entitled to her parking spot. So I, female 27, went to do some grocery shopping today, and I'm still having a hard time processing what just happened. I'm disabled, I have a small mobility disability, I'm able to walk but need a cane to support myself. I also have regular bad pain from too much walking. I do have a disability sign for my car. So, when I went shopping today, all the disabled parkings were taken. As always, mostly by people without plates. Okay. I decided to use one of the family parking spots instead because I just can't get out of or into the car a lot of times with regular spots, especially if people park way too close to the driver's door. I didn't feel entirely comfortable, but I thought a disabled person being in need for this spot should be understandable. I was wrong. When I came back to my car, a woman in her 40s bolted at me with her kid. That was maybe like 6 years old, not in a pram or anyhow, and shouted at me, "You don't look like you got children." I was very confused, but promptly figured she was upset about the parking spot. I apologized and tried to explain myself, but she kept cutting me off. Apparently, she'd been to the store manager demanding my car to be towed because she saw me leaving my car without children, but the employee denied, which made her even more mad. She told me she's sick of people like me being entitled to her parking spot. And our second story. Mama's Gangsta Boy. Some info about where I work. It's a cafe that sells a very wide variety of baked goods. Like seriously, there are so many I feel bad for the baker. Sandwiches, some soups, way too many kinds of beverages, not including coffee. This does not include the crazy specialty orders, but I have a feeling that'll be a later story. It's plopped down in the middle of an outlet mall with 2 gas stations across a large grocery store. On top of that, we're the only cafe in a family-filled neighborhood for a few good kilometers, so we get a lot of customers. I don't hate my work, I actually really like it, even though it's a bit out of my way to get there, but my coworkers are like family, and my boss is awesome. The only thing I hate about it, besides essay-long menu, is the customers. Mama's little boy, MLB for short. I working the drive-thru window at the time and was glad that things were going smoothly when suddenly I heard a guy yelling and cussing at the storefront. "Why don't you come over here and let me show you how to do your effing job?" This was a customer who we shall call MLB. MLB said this to one of the new employees that was on her 3rd day of work. You see, the store carries donuts and also mini versions of them for the kids. There was a problem as the 2 types had the exact same names, so when MLB was picking out the donuts, she was taking out the mini versions. He flips out and starts yelling at her and waving his hands. My supervisor steps in. This man had the patience to sit in a daycare of crying kids and not twitch an eye. He asked MLB if everything was all right and if he can do anything to help him. Instead of telling my supervisor the problem, he rants on about how he always comes to our store and we shouldn't be screwing up his order and yada yada yada. I'm all important and you will regret messing with me, blah blah blah. Now I came over to see what was going on and noticed that MLB was about early to mid-30s, dressed in wannabe gangsta clothes. His lack of vocabulary, inability to listen, and growing tantrum was making things harder for my supervisor to handle. For a couple of minutes, he tried to calmly explain to MLB that she was just new, it was an honest mistake, and that his order was punched in right in the cash register and was willing to return him the money. He then printed out the receipt and leans over the counter to show it to MLB, when the guy swung his hand at my supervisor, missing his face and knocking off his visor hat. I know that I said my supervisor was a very tolerating man, but physical assault, yes, that is called physical assault, was crossing a line for any of us. One of my other coworkers actually looked like he was ready to jump over the counter and pummel the guy. I couldn't blame him, which he thankfully couldn't because he was dealing with the customer at the drive-thru, and the last thing we needed was more aggravated customers. My supervisor starts yelling at MLB what was wrong with him. MLB was trying to act all tough and starting calling out my supervisor to go outside the shop and fight him, But the moment that my supervisor said that he could call the police on him, MLB was out the door, still cussing and yelling. My supervisor then asked one of the customers by the window to tell him MLB's license number before he drove away and called the cops. Not even 10 minutes go by, and this lady, about in her late 50s to early 60s, walks in all quietly and asks for the supervisor. Turns out she was MLB's mother, and she came to us asking a whole bunch of questions and details on why her son came home complaining about his donut order. My supervisor explained to her that the new girl just made a simple mistake and MLB was making a big deal over it, and it disturbed not only his coworkers, but also the other customers as well. The mother apologizes and kept saying that her son was a good boy, though a little short-tempered. Me and my coworkers were rolling our eyes at this point, but when my supervisor told her that he physically assaulted him, threatened to fight him, and had called the police, she freaked. She started to frantically apologize and beg him not to get her son in trouble. My supervisor told her that she should tell MLB to handle the situation more maturely, but agrees to call off the complaint. And our next story. Taxi, not. Many moons ago, in a dirty, grimy early 1980s New York City, far, far away from what most people are familiar with today, I had a summer job working in a printing shop in the city. In those days, the subway's really crappy, so my dad drove in from Queens every day. As our days ended at roughly the same time, he worked about 15 blocks away. I'd waited a certain corner for him to give me a ride home. At the time, he drove a 1978 Ford LTD. The 1978 model was the last year the really huge gas-guzzling tanks were being produced due to gas mileage laws changing, so that model was a car used by many of the taxi fleets. Now, the car was very light yellow, anti-cream, but nothing like a taxi cab yellow. The next thing about that car was that I could see it coming from a block or two away. Street blocks, not avenue blocks, so I'd walk to the curb and hop right in. Being the smart butt teen I was at the time, I would hail my father like I would a taxi cab. I don't think my father ever noticed, or if he did, didn't care, until one day, I saw him coming up 6th Avenue as usual. At this time, the area I worked in was still very much the garment district, so few wore suits. This particular stretch was mostly wholesale flowers and parking lots. Anyway, I'm on the corner as usual. A black man dressed professionally is waiting a little bit down the block from me trying to hail a cab. Then, as now, minorities were usually passed by taxi drivers for the usual racist reasons. I see my father coming as usual and hailed him as usual. My father passed the black guy and pulled to a stop in front of me. I guess he noticed me putting my arm down. In hindsight, it seems obvious that from behind, the car looked close enough to a cab that the black guy thought he was being passed over for a white guy, and he came running over yelling. At that point, my NYC ignore the crazy's ability skills weren't quite mature, so I saw him coming and didn't realize he was coming towards us. Ignoring there wasn't a taxi sign on the roof, any of the required signage on the doors, and I was getting into the front seat, the guy came running over screaming. Now, my dad worked in an office, bank executive, and always wore a suit. Cab drivers, even the old school ones, certainly did not. He was also well into his first cigarette of the ride home, so had his window down. The guy starts yelling at my dad about being racist, mostly incorrect, also ignoring that there wasn't even a meter in the front seat, though my dad was a big guy, so I guess it could have been blocked anyway. Now, the guy was pissed, but he wasn't doing anything threatening, so my dad just looked at him for a second or two. I'd like to say my dad flicked his cigarette at the guy, got out of the car, and beat the smack out of him or something equally dramatic. Nope, he just told the guy he wasn't a taxi, which I think the guy started to realize at that moment, rolled up the window, and we headed to Queens. As we pulled away, he wondered what that was all about, and I just said something like, I don't know, this area's weird sometimes. I did stop hailing him after that. And our last story. Karen hates the new fence and us. Backstory. When we moved in 5 years ago, there was 20 plus years worth of overgrowth between our house and the neighbor's house. It was all weeds and full of poison ivy. We asked our neighbor if she wanted to split the cost of clearing it, and she said she couldn't afford it, so we offered to do $75-25, about $1,000 for us, and she agreed. Once we cleared all the crap out of there, we found an old, rusty, mangled wire fence along the property line. We again asked her if we could remove it and put up a new fence, and she said, sure, just don't make it a privacy fence. It makes my backyard feel closed in. We were planning on building a more open fence anyway, using galvanized cattle fencing, but we couldn't build it right on the property line because there was also 2 enormous stumps right over the line on her side that didn't allow it, so we built the fence about 6 inches onto our property. We also built the fence ourselves, so it took about a month. We paid for everything 100% ourselves and didn't ask for anything from her. Over the course of that month, she'd remarked that it was looking good. Other neighbors said the same. Okay, great. Once we were done, something flipped and those letters started coming. She was worried about her grandson, who visits once a year, somehow falling down a 1-foot slope right on the property line. She was worried about her dog getting out. She doesn't have a dog. So she put a bunch of rubble and garbage along the fence on her side, which we also asked her to remove because we were going to plant the small slope with soil stabilizing plants. She ended up calling the county on us to report a permit violation. There was no violation, and started a 5+ year campaign of low-key harassment, putting up signs in her yard, throwing weeds over the fence, parking her car really close to ours on the street. Last I heard from her, she was telling neighbors she thought we were drug dealers because of all the caregivers that come to our house for my terminally ill wife. Eventually, she ended up spending a month plus grinding out the stump herself, and then built a max-height privacy fence just over the line on her side. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.